Jamie. But Kim, why don't you go ahead if you're going to take it from here?
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I hope you all enjoyed your pizza. So I think, as I was saying, we had a request from members of the working group to report on non-target captures, and we defined non-target captures as fur bearers taken out of season or non-fur bearing animals that were captured in a trap. So the slide that you see up there right now are these data are based on data that we collect from the Trapper Mail Survey. And so that in the Trapper Mail Survey, I don't know if any of you had to fill one out, but we don't collect data on dogs and cats because by statute, the trapper has to notify the department within 24 hours if they catch a dog or cat. So that comes out of the CAD database, which Chris will go over in a few minutes. So these are data, this is trappers reporting non-target catch during the season, not out of season, but during the season. And the question we ask is, did you catch and release any out of season fur bearers while targeting other in-season fur bearers? So we can't assume that these are all the non-targets that are taken, but it's what we have for data based on the Trapper Mail Survey. So you can see that there were 70 bobcats caught and released unharmed, and 6 that were killed. Looks like 1 feral cat, 2 bear, 54 fisher released, and these were with foothold traps, released unharmed, 3 marten that were killed, 1 raccoon that was killed, and 1 woodchuck that was released unharmed. So just so you guys have some context, during this time frame, we had an average of about 290 active trappers each year. In coyote trappers averaged approximately 25,000 trap nights, which is basically a trap night is 1 trap for 1 night. So those people trapping for coyotes averaged 25,000 trap nights annually, and we had about 139 trappers trapping for coyotes. About 16,000 trap nights annually in pursuit of beaver, and an average of 146 trappers, and 16,000 trap nights annually in pursuit of fisher, with an average of about 108 trappers. During this time frame, also, trappers would average approximately 4,200 trap nights in pursuit of bobcat, and that's an average of about 62 trappers. And the incidentally killed bobcats, the 6 of those account for about 2.7% of the number of bobcats trapped from 2017 to 2021, and that was 221 animals. Any questions about that slide? Okay.
I do. So how do you send these surveys out? Is everybody that has a trapping license get a survey, or how's that done?
Yes, everybody that has a trap, we actually send out, and this is, you know, I'm speaking off the cuff here, but I would say we send out about 1,300 surveys at least, and it's mandatory to return this survey to us. But, you know, you can see that the active trapper, the number of active trappers out of that number that we send are a relatively small percentage of the total number of people that actually buy licenses, or the number of permanent trappers, permanent people who have a trapping license. It became mandatory. It was always a voluntary survey, and I forget the year. Somebody there might remember that it wasn't that long ago, maybe 5 years ago, that it became mandatory. So was it 2018? Now, for some reason, my presentation won't advance. Let me try this. Okay, there we go. So now that particular that previous slide showed you the data from non-target animals taken during the season. These data are for non-target animals taken out of season in defense of property. And from these data, you can see why we try to encourage trapping to occur during the season. And it's one of the reasons why we have expanded beaver season in the past, was to try to maintain, try to encourage trapping of beaver during the season. Because in this graph, you can see that 24 otter were taken and killed in defense of property, likely when beaver were being targeted. 1,858 beaver were caught. You can see that in the right-hand side of this graph. And chances are that the 24 otter that were taken incidental to the beaver that were being targeted. So this gives you, a much broader, the question that's asked on this particular trapper mail survey is, did you catch any non-target species while trapping other species out of season for animal damage control? So these are the data that we collect from that. This is from 2018 to 2021. You can see it varies from a bat which was released, which I'm not sure exactly how that would have happened. One bobcat killed, one bobcat released unharmed. Looks like 8 domestic cats all released unharmed, 2 fisher released unharmed, or at least released. Gray fox 1, and then 2 mice that were killed. 10 muskrat that were killed and 5 unknown. We aren't sure what the outcome of those were. 30 possum released unharmed and 3 that were killed. 24 otter that ended up being killed, 2 rabbits that were unknown, 17 raccoons released, 2 killed and 1 unknown, 1 red fox released, 1 skunk that was killed and 18 unknown, 4 snapping turtles released, and it looks like 1 killed and 1 unknown, 5 squirrels released, 1 killed and 1 unknown, and 3 woodchuck. And like I said, the numbers on the right are the actual numbers, at least in terms of our trapper mail survey, that were caught in defense of property. Any questions about this one? Okay, so we'll move on to Chris.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah,
Kim,
sure,
I'm
sure.
sorry. Who does this trapping? Are
Who
they
do-
the landowners themselves, or are there people out there who provide a service? Because that's an awful lot of activity.
There can be both, David. A landowner can trap on his own property in defense of property, or can hire an agent or have a neighbor do it. But since we changed the rule 4828 rule on trapping in defense of property, anybody trapping fur bearers in defense of property have to have a trapping license and subsequently go through a trapper education course.
Thank you.
So there's a lot of people out there who are ADC people who handle animals that are considered to be nuisance by the landowner, and that can run the gamut from mice to bats to weasels to squirrels in the attic. But when it comes to fur bearers, the people who are trapping in defense of property have to have a trapping license. And I'm not sure, I can check for you if you're interested. I'm not sure how many of those people are out there off the top of my head, but I can tell you, I can find out for you if you're interested, how many return the survey.
I guess I was just curious because that's quite an effort for the numbers
Yes.
caught, and they are intentionally caught, and it just represents quite an effort. And 300 to 500 trappers licensed in the state, industrious people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's many more licensed trappers. There's like I said, probably we send out maybe 1,300 surveys, if I've got that number correct. But in terms of trapping in season, we're active trappers, there's probably under 500. And again, I'd have to check the number for how many are sent into survey for out of season trappers, but I'm happy to do that.
No, that's okay. You've given me a sense
Okay,
of what's out there. Thank you.
yeah, sure. So I'll turn it over to Chris Saunders, who compiled the data on from the CAD survey on domestic dogs and cats. And then, like I said, this is a requirement according to statute 4254. I'll advance this for you, Chris. Just
Yep.
let me know.
So next, please.
Yep.
So one of the questions that came up from the working group was how many of the incidental catch was happening, particularly related to domestic pets, whether it be cats or dogs. And as Kim already mentioned, this information has been required to be gathered since 2018. And it all goes into the CAD system, which is the central database, not just for the wardens, but for all law enforcement in the state. So every year, the wardens enter 6,000 to 8,000 cases / complaints / calls they receive, and it all goes into a jumble of tens of thousands that include everything from someone's muffler to trespassing, you name it. So it's a big database, and you know, sometimes things get overlooked, and someone brought up the fact that we missed one of the cases. You know, there weren't a lot of cases, as you'll see, but we missed one, and this one has actually been updated to reflect that. So in this 5-year period, there were 36 reports of cats and or dogs being trapped incidentally. One was actually not incidentally, as we'll find out. And it was both during regular trapping season and during animal damage control issues. The vast majority were dogs. They represented about 72% of the cases. One was probably feral. Then there was 10 cats. Most of the cats actually were feral, and as you see, one was purposeful. That included a person who was tired of the neighbor's cat attacking her chicken, so she caught the cat in a live trap and called the warden to come deal with it. And then I also admitted one of the cases because it was very suspect. The witness kept changing, and it wasn't even clear that the cat had even been caught. Regardless of those 36, 23, so just over half occurred during a regular trapping season by a licensed trapper. The vast majority had permission, and we weren't sure about 2, but basically 20 out of 23 had permission to be trapping. 3 of those did involve violations. One was not having permission, and one regarded having a body gripping trap that was too large on the ground, and one that wasn't high enough in the air. Of all these cases, almost all of them occurred on private land. Only 2 of them occurred on public land. One of those was on the Green National Forest. The other was in a culvert that was in a right of way. Interestingly enough, far more actually occurred on the trapper's property themselves. So in that case, you had neighbors either walking their dogs on the trapper's property and getting caught, or just animals running loose. So the more important parts is that none of those dogs, none of the 26 were on leash, and 9 were just completely free roaming out and about without any control at all. Next, please. We look at trap type. The vast majority, again, not vast, but the majority were related to foothold traps. There were 5 related to body gripping. You'll note there was 1 for cable restraint, which might be kind of surprise you, but they are permitted for use by the USDA on airport property. In that case, a dog dug its way under a fence and got caught in a cable restraint, completely released unharmed, no problems. But that was an actual permitted use. It was not a violation. Next. We look by year, you can see that, certainly once mandatory reporting came in effect, the numbers jumped up. But, keep in mind that, we're still talking in terms of the reports we have, less than 11 per year during the past 5 years. And it doesn't really reflect trapper effort. It doesn't reflect the number of trappers out there. Some of it's probably just coincidental. There's not a lot of variation. The orange represents people involved in whether nuisance control work. It does not mean that they could have been the landowner who was actually doing it, not necessarily someone involved in animal damage control for a person. And then there were quite a few unknowns and others, which, one was probably related to kids playing an old barn and setting a trap. There were just some random weird ones that, yep.
I apologize for my old eyesight.
Uh-huh.
Can you tell me what each color represents?
So blue occurred during trapping season. The orange is is nuisance related, out of trapping season, and the gray was unknown or other. We either wasn't listed or we were not, the wards weren't able to determine what the cause was. So next. Finally, injuries, and this of course is, when particularly people who don't trap, who are not familiar, you talk about an domestic animal caught in the trap, they automatically jump to the worst conclusion. The reality is that of these 36 cases, there are 4 fatal. One of those cats was feral, one of the dogs was likely feral. And 3 of those occurred during the regular trapping season. I'm going to go through each one of these 3. One was a violation. That's where a body gripping trap that exceeded the diameter at the height of less than 5 feet off the ground. That involved the feral dog, probably. The second one, the landowner had told the dog walker, that trapping was happening on the property, and that dog needed to be leashed, which it wasn't. And that's how that fatal incident occurred. And then in the third case, an outdoor cat was caught and killed. Wardens repeatedly tried to talk to the owner. The cat had a collar, but the owner never came forward, didn't respond, so we moved on. The vast majority, as I've already noted, were non-fatal. 14 of those were completely unharmed and released. 7 recorded minor injuries, 1 had major, and then the remaining 10 didn't say. So we assume, based on the report, that it was probably very minor, because those are usually ones where the animal was released immediately when it was found. Of those 32, 14 were actually examined by a vet. So that would include the minor and major injuries, including some of the unharmed. And then 5 of the cases, there was no idea. It wasn't clear when it was determined. So, any questions on this?
What was the intended target?
It was hard to say. It depended on the season. There's really no way to say, if one target in particular was more likely to result.
Right, that's what I was wondering, if a particular type of trapping.
I think if we looked back, and we can certainly do this, if we looked at when at least it happened in season and the type of trap and the location, we probably can deduce when and what the target was.
Great. Thank you, Chris.
Yep.
Any other questions for Chris before we move on? Okay. So we're still in meeting 3. And if you recall Sean's presentation, one of the issues that the group agreed to discuss was a humane dispatch. And so Dr. Walt Cottrell offered to check with the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies and the Association of Wildlife Veterinarians, because we were under the impression that those 2 groups working together were attempting to develop national policies on humane dispatch. And so after significant amount of discussion, the group agreed, I should say there was consensus, and we actually voted on it, that we would put off making a recommendation on humane dispatch until the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies and wildlife veterinarians came out with a recommendation, as long as our report and recommendation to the commissioner included our interest in circling back to this subject once those recommendations came out. So that's where we left the discussion around humane dispatch. And then in the second meeting, I don't think I mentioned this, but each of the 2 interest groups were asked to develop and present a position, their position, on each one of those 5 issues that Sean went over. And I don't know if I can still get to them, but the VTA petition, covered bait, conibears, humane dispatch, and trail offsets. So each one of the interest groups was supposed to come back to this meeting, meeting number 3, with their recommendations so that we could look for alignments between the 2 groups. POW, HSUS, and VWC presented a collective proposal. The VTA, because they had not yet met with their directors, were not in a position to actually speak to anything but their original petition, which was the petition around trapping systems. So I'll go over those both. So the POW, HSUS, VWC proposal, they agreed, they didn't oppose the VTA petition, although they weren't comfortable that it was enforceable or that it would benefit animal welfare or selectivities. And they wanted, their position was that BMPs were the floor, not the ceiling, and they saw serious deficiencies in the BMP research process. Their recommendation for trail setbacks was a 500-foot setback from public trails. And they wanted more discussion regarding what had been a unanimous agreement at a previous meeting to restrict trail offsets to state-owned land excluding WMAs. They wanted offsets on Class 4 town roads, public parks and playgrounds, and other areas where people might be expected to recreate. Baits and lures, they recommended prohibiting the baiting of a trap if the bait is visible from the air. Body gripping traps, they wanted to see a prohibition on the use of body gripping traps on land and mandate that in the water they be fully submerged. They wanted to prohibit the drowning of animals in submerged sets and require the reporting of incidental take. And then their recommendation for dispatch was by gunshot only. In that third meeting, what the VTA went over was their petition, which I'll review for you folks here. Maybe you've seen it. But they reiterated their belief that the BMPs would advance a high standard of animal welfare, and they reviewed the items in their petition that they thought would address those concerns. And those items were that all base plates must feature a center chain mount with a swivel with free moving chains that allow mobility for the animals that are caught, that all traps have an adjustable pan tension, that traps must be anchored with a minimum of 12-inch and a maximum of 18-inch chain link, that foothold traps be padded, offset, laminated, or have jaws with a minimum thickness of 5/16, and that no foothold trap shall be set on land with a spread of more than 6 1/4 inches. We pretty much ended the meeting there because we really couldn't have a discussion about the remaining 3 items. We actually spent some time on trail offsets without a huge amount of consensus. And so we ended the meeting and opted to have a fourth meeting. And the VTA agreed to meet with their directors before that fourth meeting and come back with their position on the remaining issues that the group had decided to discuss. And also after the third meeting, the department sent out a survey to collect information from the working group and get some suggestions around content and process. I think, was I right, Chris, that only 4 responses? You only got 4 responses?
Yes.
And was there anything that you wanted to add to this in terms of whether we were informed by those responses in the survey?
It certainly helped us figure out what topics that we should probably focus on first. Everything was mixed results for what part of what kind of process they preferred during the meeting, whether it was small group, big group, et cetera.
Thank you.
But it was such a small subset of the attendees, I wouldn't make any sweeping conclusions.
Okay. So we decided to have a fourth, yeah, let me see. Sorry, I went backwards. We decided to have a fourth meeting on September 27th. And because the act actually also required that there be some discussion around hunter trapper education, we asked Nicole Meyer, who's the Hunter Trapper Education Program Coordinator, to just give a 30-minute presentation so the group understood what was currently involved in the Trapper Education Program and where we might go from here in regards to incorporating any of the regulations that came out of this working group process. And so she came and did that, answered questions. And then we moved on to the VTA proposal. They came back to the group with their own proposal based on the issues that the group had agreed to discuss. Their proposal for trail setbacks was no trap set within 10 feet of a trail except under bridges and waterways. Baits and lures, their proposal was meat-based baits should be covered at the time the trap is set. Body gripping traps, no meat-based baited body gripping traps shall be set on the ground. Cable restraints, they opted to include cable restraints as a new type of trap that should be legalized. And they also said that if it was legalized, it would require special trapper ed certification by the department. As something that I'll talk about a little bit when we get to the parking lot is that they also supported the proposal to increase the number of game wardens, which came up several times in the working group discussion, and supported the idea that trapper education curriculum would include any new regulations that came out of this process. So one of the things that we tried to do as a result of these two proposals, we had them on two different butcher paper, and we encouraged the moderators during dinner, encouraged the participants during dinner to look for areas of alignment between the two proposals. But when we came back from dinner, we had somewhat limited success at actually coming to an agreement. And so we actually ended the meeting and said that the department would take the feedback that we got from both groups, and we would develop recommendations that we would offer to the commissioner. Again, through this board process, there would be other opportunities for, and through the public meeting that we're going to have in November, there'd be other opportunities for both interest groups to weigh in on whatever we recommended to the commissioner. And so that wasn't necessarily cast in concrete, but that's how we left the fourth meeting. We also had several parking lot issues, things that came up multiple times, that we also thought the department needs to address. The question about whether or not these regulations would apply only to those trappers trapping within the trapping season, or would they apply to landowners and other people trapping outside the season for nuisance wildlife. The other parking lot issue was the increase in the size of the warden force, including any changes to the regulation and trapper education curriculum, which I think is also probably inherent in the act itself. And then also, this is actually in the act itself, is to come up with a potential cost for funding trap replacement, assuming that there'll be some trappers who will have to swap out, if these regulations go through, we'll have to swap out whatever current traps they have for some of these traps that meet the best management practices regulation. So I think there were some questions at the beginning of the meeting tonight about a timeline. We're looking at a public information meeting on November 29th. I think that has been confirmed, maybe, Chris, or are we still waiting on the venue?
Still waiting to be the date.
Okay, so as soon as we know that, we will let you know. We then, after that public meeting, will make some final recommendations to the commissioner. We need to report, we're required to report to the legislature by January 15th. And then we'll likely do a proposal to this board in February or March, and hopefully have regulations in place by January 2023 as per the Act 159 requires. So with that, we'll open it up to, I'd be interested to have Mike weigh in a little bit on his feedback on what he thought or any suggestions he might have, and then open it up to any other discussion. I will try to stop presenting here.
Kim, it's Sean. Your
Yes,
slide
Sean.
said those board regulations in place by January 23. It's
Yeah.
January.
Oh, 2024. Thank you, Sean. Yeah, no, did you see people panicking in the room? Sorry about that. Yes, I get my years mixed up. Good catch. Sean always catches those critical details. That's because he's a warden. Anything you have to add, Mike?
Oh,
Or
I have a
any
lot to
other
add.
department staff too?
I have a lot to add. Actually, like I said it in one of the second meeting, that presentation about BMPs by APWA was amazing, that the amount of money and work that has gone into that study. And you could probably clarify, Kim, the details. I think it was 0 to 250 was the range that categorized whether a trap was going to be rejected based on any injuries that happened to an animal. That it was a blind study, so that the vets had no idea what the trap was that caused the injury. And from this 0 to 250 something, the cutoff was 55. So I think a laceration on a paw bounced that trap out of the running entirely, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I'd have to check on that, Mike, but I think your
Yep.
point is well taken, that these were based on international standards, the way that they rated the injury scores, and they were very consistent from one part of the country to another. And I can't remember whether it's 0 to 250 or what exactly those were. But if people watch the presentation, they'll get all those numbers.
Right. And it being a blind study, it being peer reviewed, and it being over the course of 30 years from its inception, and I think you said 22 years for this specific program, and I think it's up to $40 million that has been spent. There's no better piece of work that's out there, and until somebody else comes up with something better, it's the standard that I think we need to go by, because it is meeting all the goals of what the legislature has asked, which is refining the tool so that the risk of injury and harm is brought down to a minimum. And nobody else has provided this other than the BMPs. It is a long thing to look at and to sort of digest, but it's certainly worthwhile, because it takes a lot of the questions out of the equation for me. So that was my observation during the.
Sorry, you're blanking out again.
Say again?
You're blanking out. Speak
Okay.
to the microphone, please.
Well, it's about 2 feet in front of me, David, so
It may be your service, David. It's clear to me.
that's basically what I think I can turn over to this board. The other thing was that I think everybody came into it with a lot of apprehension, and I like the fact that Kevin Lawrence added point number 13, which was, let's work from a place of forgiveness. That there's been animosity and between the two groups or multiple groups, and that I really liked the fact that we proceeded in a way that was respectful to everyone that was there and kind of put all that garbage and baggage aside. And it was the first time that a working group was used and attempted to try to fix something that throughout the years has seemed to us grown more and more contentious. So everybody came in with a fair amount of apprehension. But did it, and it was successful from my perspective. And there were no rules that we had to go by, so we were in a lot of ways we're shooting from the hip. But we got a lot of work done. Respectfully. So hopefully, next month or two, we'll provide at least a beginning. Step in the right
Mike,
direction.
I think that's an important point that I didn't mention, is that the working group members themselves deserve a lot of credit for, the meetings went from 5 to 8:30, as you on the board know, those can be long and grueling hours. And people showed up and they worked at this. And it was respectful, but it was also challenging. So I'm very appreciative to the working group members who actually were willing to put in the volunteer time to come to 4 of these meetings within 2 months. So thank you to you, Mike.
You're welcome.
I have 2 really quick questions. This is Allison from Chittenden County. And I guess I'll direct them to you, Kim. I'm new to this data and I want to make sure that I'm understanding it correctly. There were a lot of different data points across this presentation. I just want to make sure the percentage of non-target catch overall to the total trapping take is extremely low. Is that a fair generalization to make or not?
That's fair. Yes.
Thank you. Thanks. My second question was, where and how can I find the AFWA report or presentation?
We'll send you a link to the actual presentation. And I think, Mark, we sent the working group members a link to the monograph, right? This is the monograph. What we can do, Allison, is dig up what we sent to the working group members and forward whatever they got to the board, because you're going to start to need much of the same information.
Great, thanks so much.
Sure. Thanks for
Yeah,
asking good questions.
And one of the things we talked about recently is to see, this really depends if to be helpful to the board, is to have maybe a presentation by AFWA on that we heard at the working group on the best management practices.
Yeah, you're saying, see if Bryant would come back again, Mark?
If he would to this board,
Yeah.
or one of his representatives from AFWA who's quite familiar, with
Yeah.
the work. I'll leave that to the board to discuss perhaps maybe later tonight or at another meeting. But it was very overwhelming to me, the amount of information and data. Mike alluded to it, the amount of money and time. And, obviously we can repeat some of it, but when we have the experts right there that did the work themselves and worked with the veterinarians,
Right.
given the magnitude and the significance of what this board's about to embark on, if it can happen, that would be my pleasure. move that way, but again, I think it's up to the board. It's their time.
Yeah.
To want to hear that. And we can only try to make it happen. We can't guarantee it because that one doesn't work for us.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Mark, I was involved in some of the on the ground research collection of data, and I have trouble with the, wrapping my head around the big picture. So it is really helpful to have Bryant give a presentation because he just has all those years of experience.
Kim, I have a quick question. This is Brad.
Hi, Brad.
I don't know if are they called offsets or setbacks when we keep referring to.
Well, so there's offsets on a trap, which is a space between the jaws, and then there's trail setbacks. So
my question is about setbacks.
Yep.
I'm trying to, I understand the safety component of it, of which I think what's driving this portion of the discussion. But is there a more specific issue that we're trying to resolve with establishing a particular setback? Is it the unintended take, or is it personal safety to individuals who may come in contact with a trap? And if that's the issue, I'm just curious from Sean's perspective, if that's an issue, or are we trying to resolve an issue that isn't an issue?
So go ahead, Sean. You want to answer both questions?
I can try.
Okay. You go.
I don't want to speak because I didn't put that forward as far as the reasoning why. My understanding is a personal and pet safety issue. To my knowledge, in the state of Vermont and through, the BMP crack stuff that AFWA did, minus trappers catching themselves, I would never call it a human safety issue, because we just don't have reports of those things happening. I'm not saying it never has happened. It may have happened. We might not have aware of it. But I would say it is mostly a domestic pet safety issue, is the setback thing. Yep.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Jay Sweeney, Kim. I guess speaking for myself, I think if you need a request from the board to have these folks come, I think we can all read their information and make different interpretations of what the information means. It would be helpful to have somebody here explaining what the information means to help us better understand it if they're available.
Okay.
We don't want to get this wrong. We don't want to go back here 5 years from now.
Okay. Did someone else have a question? I thought somebody else might have spoke up. Okay. Anything else, Mark, that you feel we need to touch upon, or the commissioner feel that we need to touch upon before we move into the next phase?
No, I think what we'll try to do is as soon as possible, nail down the location and date of the public hearing. Encourage any board members to go. That would be to me an official action of the board to go and hear at that public hearing to do that. So we're hoping for I think it's the 29th, Tuesday, I believe, between the major firearm seasons and for many reasons, there's no time that's going to be good between now and January, to be honest with you, for our law enforcement staff and some of our biological staff. We want to get it done. We have to, because we got to get that public hearing for the commissioner to fulfill his obligation to the legislature. So we'll get that out, and at that meeting, unlike probably other hearings, internally our department staff will take care of all the logistics and all the working with the public. So you folks can just come and listen and relax. And enjoy the meeting.
And Mark, it's my understanding this will not replace the board hearing that will come
Correct.
afterwards in the spring probably, or early summer.
Correct, correct. And those will be like, again, board hearings, which as your aide, we will help set those up and work with you to facilitate those hearings. And you, go ahead, Brad's got a question.
So the information meeting that you're talking about having is sometime at the end of this month.
Yep.
How is that going to be conducted? Is it going to be, are you going to direct people to answering certain questions? Or are you just going to open up the floor for a few minutes and let people just go? Or what's your objective? Just to hear people's input generally around trapping? Or is it something more focused?
So actually that public meeting, it has been dictated by Act 159. So we have to hold a public meeting. And I don't think we've developed the format yet, Brad, but I assume there'll be a presentation. And then, we'll be looking for feedback in some way in regards to a draft set of recommendations. So it'd be pretty specific.
Okay.
That'll be November. If I said October, I apologize. And I think most likely, Brad, is the ideal mode is when, I have no idea how many people come. Our goal will be to hear from every person. So we'll try to have an atmosphere where people don't feel intimidated, where people will get up and try to shout someone else down or go back and forth. So we'll probably use the large group, small group format where we'll facilitate tables and ideally, and we'll spend some time and thought into this as a team, but I think we're going to try to get at, well, why do you feel this way? We know people have strong opinions about this activity. We want to respect that, but we'd like to understand why you have that. I did learn in the working group that the issue was more about what Sean talked about, the safety of pets, not the safety of people. Although some people were quite concerned how to handle their pet that might be caught in a trap. That was a safety fear of some individuals. But that's the stuff that we'd love to get out of the hearing, not to get up there and have 500 people talk for a minute or so and say this or that and shout it down. It's not going to be helpful to the department of the commissioner or you.
Okay, any other questions for Kim? Anything else for us, Kim, at this point?
No, thank you. Thank you very much for your attention. I really appreciate it. And we'll be circling back at some point.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Kim.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, Kim.
Yep.
Okay, any comments or questions for the department on the presentation? Not? Okay, next item on the agenda is the commissioner's update.
I also want to commend the working group, but also the staff. The fact that they were able to get folks in here and communicating on what's clearly highly emotional for a lot of folks and get to the meat of the matter and get toward solutions is really impressive. So everybody who was involved in that should be very proud of their work. And I'll just say, you've heard me say this every meeting probably, but that doesn't surprise me. Everything I see, whether it's the deer meetings, going out in the field, I continue to be impressed with the professionalism and the quality of the work that comes out of each and every individual who works for the department. Some of the newer board members are aware of this, but I wanted to let every board member know that you all are going to need to take mandated ethics training course. We're working out the details on how that's going to work because it's easy for me because I have a state email address, but you don't. And so we're trying to figure out and orchestrate that. It's not a bad thing, actually. You are in your role here on the board, public servants, and we want to make sure that you don't inadvertently take actions that might jeopardize your ability to continue to serve, or even worse. It was passed by the legislature, we all have it, and it's a good thing. So just look forward to that. It's a pretty busy time of year. Every time of year is busy for us, but this is exceptionally so. We're at the tail end of developing our budget and submitting that up in preparation for January. And also our legislative initiatives. There are a few what I'll call housekeeping issues, and then a few policy type issues, initiatives that we have. And we'll be presenting those this Friday with leadership in the governor's office to see how they want to proceed. And so I don't want to get out ahead of that meeting, but once we do, I'll let folks know what's going on. Nothing earth gathering this point. I did want to update the coyote hound hunting issue is similar to what we've just been talking about tonight. We need to go through some sort of process to gather information and also bring something to myself that I'll bring to the board regarding the legislative requirements regarding that. And so we're going to probably initiate that at the end of this week or early next week. And phase one will actually be a survey out to the working group members. And then there'll be more to follow after we get that information and compile it. That has a bit of a different time frame as well. I think it's funny that since I've become commissioner, my time availability to be out hunting and fishing has diminished significantly, which is a bit of an irony there. Perhaps explains the previous commissioner's lack of success in Vermont. But for instance, I'm going down to R&L Archery on Saturday through the deer check-in station. I'll be going with the secretary and it's youth weekend. So we want to show support to our youth hunters and also the biologists down there. And but that's part of the job. It's actually one of my favorite part of the jobs is going out and meeting people and talking to them and listening to especially youth tell their stories because they're so excited. And, they're with a mentor, and just the pride that they have for each other is inspiring and really a lot of what we're all about. But I've been doing a lot of those field things. I was down last Saturday in Salisbury and recognized some of the instructors from the Let's Go Fishing program. And I was lucky enough to be able to give the award for Instructor of the Year to a very old and dear friend, Frank Haggerty, who I used to run EMS with at St. Mike's 100 years ago. And he volunteers a lot, not just for us, but for other programs. But kudos to Allie. That program's outstanding. And it meets one of the great missions we have is to spread the joy of fishing out to people who haven't had that chance. So you do a great job with it. So thank you very much. And lastly, I have these for you tonight. And for those of you who, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 of you over there. Here are next year's calendars. just give them all. I'm really impressed. And some of those pictures or photos, which are amazing. I happen to like the snowy owl and the coyote, but were taken by one of our own staff. And it shows you the passion that people have working here, not just for the job, but for the outdoors, and they see the beauty in it. And this calendar is just amazing. So with that, that's probably the bulk of my report. But if folks have questions, I'll take them. Hey, Bob.
Mitch, is there a timeline we have on the coyote?
It's somewhat different. And off the top of my head, I don't recall, but yeah, but we're going to get moving on it. One of the things is there's a moratorium on the hound hunting of coyotes. So that's kind of the sword of Damocles, if you will. So, I will say this, both of these initiatives will occupy a great deal of staff time. Just the amount of time and effort that folks spent on getting to where the trapping is right now is a huge lift, and we'll have to do it again, and I need to be careful. While these issues are both important, that I don't burn out my staff.
Just to echo what he said, I thought the original time frame was to kind of do them at the same time, which I understood was going to be a lot of time and effort from the department, but I want to make sure that the hounding doesn't get pushed back. I feel like it should have been prioritized because there is no hounding allowed right now, that perhaps the working group effort should have been focused on hounding.
Well, we're not, so I can't go back in time. And two, the person who was the point person for hounding retired. And so it set us back, and that was a surprise that the retirement was coming. And so that's the reality of what's happened. And so that's where we are. But it is a priority for me now. It always has been. But when you have multiple priorities, you need to juggle. But I appreciate your input.
Along the same thing with the coyote working group. So the working group is within the department as opposed to what we came up with for this.
No, there are outsiders.
There are
Yeah.
outsiders also.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, I think it's important that we're as broad as the issue requires, but not so big that it becomes unwieldy.
Right.
And I think we hit the sweet spot with this working group now, and so it's very similar players.
David has something to say.
David?
Commissioner, are you guys able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I didn't hear it in your response, so I had a question for you. Did the department contract out with a group called Responsive Management for a survey?
Yes, we did. Yeah.
Okay, that's just want to check to make sure. That's the only question I had.
Yep.
We've gotten enough questions about that it might be worth asking Chris to briefly summarize.
Sure. After a request for proposals, we have contracted with Responsive Management, who we've used before for a number of wildlife related surveys. They are the primary public opinion survey group in the country for natural resources related issues. And they are in the process, in fact, they probably finished up today, of doing a large statewide study of fur bear issues ranging from fur bear management, such as trapping, to attitudes about particular fur bearers, and also looking at animal damage complaints and what species are involved, and what kind of remedies, people took, and, if they could kind of quantify that damage. That started middle of last week and should be done, like I said, today or tomorrow. One thing we've learned over the years is, you hear a lot of people saying they don't want to do surveys. But when you get a Vermonter on the phone to talk about wildlife, our responsive management says that it's harder to get people off the phone than it is to get them to answer the question. So it's going exceedingly well. There's a high response rate. And we should have those results within the next month or two.
Thanks, Chris. Anything else?
So is your goal to use that survey to inform your recommendation to us on how to phase two?
I think it's important that we'll assess the information and it'll inform many of the issues that we're gonna be dealing with.
I guess
It's not specific to
Yeah.
this.
I guess it was more from a timing perspective. Whether or not you anticipate reviewing all that feedback before we received either of the two recommendations.
We didn't precipitate the survey because of what you're doing now, the best management practice, but it's going to be very helpful. What we initiated right now, something we want to do for a long time, but it was an easy decision to make internally because we have excess Pittman Robertson funds, those federal funds that Catherine talked to some of you about in the training to do. So that was a decision internally made by management departments. Let's get this going, this information on this survey. So, yes and yes, Brett, probably it's going to be here.
Yeah, I don't think we're not gonna ignore it.
Yeah.
But it wasn't.
It will probably help our future direction and planning as well.
One other quick question. How about the moose season? So are you hearing anything about ticks or the health of the herd?
Well, I want to be very, very careful to not get out ahead, but heard, and this is all anecdotal, but that they're not, the ticks could be down. How's that? But that could all change. But actually, I got somebody was reporting directly, a hunter to me today. I asked them those questions, so that's all anecdotal, but fingers crossed. I don't know, do you know, Mike?
I think, because I've been there every day asking those same questions.
Yeah.
That's what I've heard.
We'll see.
The animals are in good shape, weight-wise though. Dietrich Alexander got a beautiful one. I have a picture of it.
Shocking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, Commissioner.
Thank you.
That's it. Any other questions, Commissioner? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And
Actually, I have one question. If somebody wants one of these, can they buy them on the website or do you sell them somewhere particular?
You can go online. And I think, what are we, $15? Is that?
Yeah, that's what it says on the back.
thank you. All right, now we'll just do a roundtable. If anybody, any board member has anything they want to say or add to the group, you're welcome to jump in. Jamie, we'll start over on your left. Our left, and go come around this way.
I'll just quickly say that I will have no problem coming to any meetings because I already filled my tag this year.
Oh, here we go.
Not that I want to rub it into anybody, but
Sure.
No, not at all.
Wax on, wax off.
I got a really nice 213-pound 8-pointer.
Oh. How's your
Yep.
car?
Car's doing great. I'm down one arrow though,
Where'd you get this? Up in
Board
Canada?
meeting.
Nice.
up in Holland.
Wow,
Congratulations.
Thank you.
congratulations.
Thanks.
I've been out about 14 days and nowhere near that kind of luck.
Mike, did it.